And you're on.
Alright. Hello, my name is Rebecca Garrett, and we're here at the Mobile Army Airfield Museum on April 16th, 2005. This is Mr. Clegg Langley, and I'm going to interview him. Okay. What did you do before you joined the service?
When I was 16 years old, my mother had left my father and me, and I was 16 years old. I wanted to go into the war. I wasn't old enough to get into any of the services except for the Merchant Marines. My daddy signed the paper so I could go into Merchant Marines. I went to the U.S. Maritime Academy in Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn, New York in 1943. I stayed in there until 1945. I was in the Merchant Marines. I sailed on the ships, Liberty ships, and I saw some of them sunk. I've been in a hurricane in 1944, East Coast, off of the United States. I went to Halifax, Nova Scotia, waited for convoy. I went to Oban, Scotland. I've been to Cardiff, Southern Wales. I've been to Liverpool, England, loading and unloading supplies for the military. I also went to Le Havre, France, and Marseille, France during the Second War. I was also in Normandy. I didn't see any combat, but I'd seen ships go down. And I was glad to get out of the Merchant Marines when I did. I got out in 1945. I came home, got married in 46. And in 1948, I joined the Army, stayed in the U.S. Army. I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, took my training. And after I took my training, I went to Berlin, Germany. I was in Berlin, Germany during the blockade and the airlift when the Russians had all the roadways, the autobahns blocked off. We couldn't get supplies into Germany unless we flew them in. We flew them in the C-54 airplanes. I worked at Tempelhof Air Base as a boss checker. I was in the 16th Constabulary Squadron, and our job was to go to the Tempelhof Air Base and watch the ships being unloaded, the airships being unloaded, to make sure the food supplies were not pilfered, because we were feeding the Germans. Not only the Germans, we were feeding the Americans. Berlin was divided into 4 sections. The French had one section, the Americans had one section. The English had another section, and Russia had the next section. And we supported all the Germans with the airlift. I was in the airlift until 1948, until 1950. In 1950, I was told that I could get an easy discharge, early out. I put 2.5 years in, and I thought that was enough time. I came home. I had to go into the reserves. When I went into the reserves, the Korea War broke out in 1950. And then they called me to active duty and sent me to Korea. In Korea, I was in, before I went to Korea, I had to go to Fort Bliss, or had to go to Texas, Fort Hood, Texas. I went there for reserve training, which was 2 weeks, learn how to drive a tank and so on. I went to Korea, and while I was in Korea, they stationed me in the 84th Engineer Construction Battalion, building bridges. When I went into Korea in 1950, they had what was called the Pusan Perimeter. The North Koreans and Chinese, naturally, they drove us out into Pusan, almost out into the ocean. And then they finally got troops in there and started pushing us northward. But I was all over Korea, in different places. I was in the engineers, building bridges. I was what was called an artificer, repairing the weapons and guns. They wanted me to do that instead of pounding spikes in the bridges. So I did that, and I stayed in Korea from 50 to 51. I got out in 51, and I was sent to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, as a supply sergeant. I went down there as a supply sergeant, and we had new recruits coming in the Army, and I had to supply them with all their clothing and equipment. And I was there until 1955. That was in 1950 to 55. And then they sent me back to Korea. I went back to Korea after the war from 55, 6, and 7. I came back in 57, and they sent me to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Put me in a missile outfit. I was in the Ajax Missile Battalion. At this time in the 50s, they had in all the cities in the United States, they put up missile sites. They had the Ajax missile sites, and these were supposed to protect the cities against any invasion or any interruption during of wartime. So I was in the Ajax missiles in Pittsburgh and Monroeville, Pennsylvania, for 3 years. We went from the Ajax missile to Nike Hercules missile. From Pittsburgh 55 to 60. I was in Monroeville, and I finally got transferred and sent to Fort Bliss, Texas, of which I took another training in the Hawk missiles. Hawk means homing all the way killer. They sent me to the Hawk missile training in Fort Bliss, Texas, and from there we loaded up equipment and supplies, and they shipped me to Germany. I went to outside of Frankfurt, Germany, in Bad Nauheim, and we had a Hawk missile site. Want me to pause?
Yeah, you know what? Just for a second.
Okay. I left the Hawk missile in 1964. I left Frankfurt, Germany, and went back to this Fort Knox, Kentucky. At Fort Knox, Kentucky, I became an Army instructor, teaching military personnel after they got out of basic training, teaching supply and catalogs, how to read catalogs, and so on. That was just 8 weeks. I had 8 weeks of advanced training. After I left Fort Knox, Kentucky, in 1965, I went back to Germany for the second time, second time. This time, I went back as an instructor in the United States Army School, Germany, in Oberammergau, near Garmisch, Partenkirchen, Germany. I was instructor there from 68 through 70. At that time, I was instructed by a friend of mine that I might be slated to go to Vietnam. I was in Korea during the war. I was in Merchant Marines during the Second War, and I felt that if I went to Vietnam, I might not make it for retirement. So I had 20 years in the service at that time, and I knew if I put in for retirement, they would freeze my station. I couldn't leave anywhere. I'd have to stay there till I retired. They couldn't ship me anywhere else. So I put in for retirement. In 1970, I retired from the Army. And that was basically a short version of my military career. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Where were you living?
Before I went into service,
Yes.
I was born in Morristown, New Jersey, and my mother had left my dad, my brother, and I when I was 6 years old. I didn't see her for about 15 years later. My dad, him being a hillbilly, took me to his hometown in North Carolina. We lived in a 1931 Hudson. He had fixed the front seat, the back, so it would lay down as a bed. And we lived on the coast of Wilmington, North Carolina for a few months. We slept in the bed, and we had a tent that was attached to the car. And we went out fishing and went out for shrimp and so on and so forth to live there for a few months off of the coast, on the Sound, on the coast of Wilmington, North Carolina. Lived there for a while. Then we went back to North Jersey. Dad took me back to North Jersey. I got tired of moving from this place to that place, stay here for a week, maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, and then I'd end up coming home crying because I'm leaving all the friends I just met in school last month, and now I'm leaving tomorrow. So when I was 14 years old, I quit school. I was kind of disgusted of leaving my friends like this. So I quit school, and then in 1941, the war broke out. I was on Stuyvesant Avenue, Irvington, New Jersey, on December the 7th, 1941. I heard President Roosevelt on the radio declaring that we were attacked Pearl Harbor. That's where I was at this time. I wanted to do some service for my country. I was 14 years old, 15, 16 years old. I wanted to go into service and fight for my country. I wasn't old enough to go into any military service except the Merchant Marines. I could go in the Merchant Marines and do my support by getting my father's signature. And that's how I ended up in the Merchant Marines during the Second War. And that's what happened to me then.
Right. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted. I enlisted in the Merchant Marines.
Okay. Where were you when the war ended?
When the war ended, the World War II, I was in Millville, New Jersey. I came down here.
Did you see combat?
Yes, I had 6 months combat in Korea, and that was enough. I was close enough where I could see artillery shells and I could hear guns in the background, but I didn't get hit. I was lucky.
Tell me about your most memorable experience.
Talk about what now?
Tell me about your most memorable experience.
Was watching the ships go down in the Merchant Marines, the ones that were torpedoed and sunk. To me, that was more frightening and more scary than any experience that I even put in the Army. Okay?
Were you ever fearful?
Yes, I was fearful. I was 16, 17 years old, and I didn't know if I was going to make it back or not. And I was thankful. A couple of times we missed these big mines out in the water. We missed them with our ship, and I got through that all right. Okay?
Okay. How have your experiences during the war influenced your present day of life?
It taught me several things: how to be organized, how to depend on myself and not others. These were two great experiences that I learned in the military. And I think myself personal, if you are physical able and you can, I think all children should go in the military for at least a year or 2 years. It would be a great experience because some children don't know how to become dependent unless they get out on their own and get some instructions. They need help, some of them.
Okay. What was the worst thing about the war?
The death, seeing people die. Going through Korea, I went through Seoul, and I seen dead bodies in the sidewalk. This is awesome. One experience I had going in a convoy, going to Seoul, driving up on the beach, and there was a mama-san, a lady with her child on her back. And in a convoy, you don't stop a convoy so this person can get across the road. She tried to make it across the road, and a tank hit her. And it was awesome seeing this. That's that one. She got mashed. Go ahead. I can't go any further on that. It's awesome. You can't stand and see that. Okay. Whoops, thanks.
That's the end. Thank you.
That was the end? Okay, that's
Thank
it.
you very much.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I couldn't see that anymore. When I see that, I'll never forget that. She was hit with a tank and 2 or 3 run over her. And the kid. And when you see this, it's just no taking place of it. Nothing. That's the end of my interview, unless you have any other questions.
Thank
You're welcome. I'm sorry I got a little carried away, but
It's okay.
I think about those things sometimes, and it's hard to overcome.
you.
Tell us more about the Berlin airlift.
All right, I was in the 16th Constabulary Squadron in Berlin, stationed at Andrew Barracks. And our job was 3 months of the year, we would go out to the airport, Tempelhof Air Base, and we would be what is called boss checkers, supervise the loading, the unloading of the supplies that came in on the C-54 airplanes. They had duffel bags loaded with coal, and they stood them up in the plane so they could load tons of coal on an airplane and fly them in. They also brought food supplies, clothing, everything they could, not just for the German civilians, but also for the military, because we had to feed the military too. This was for 3 months out of the year. Another 3 months we took riot control training as police officers or security people, training how to control riots that might break out in Berlin. Another 3 months we went out in the field. We lived in tents. We learned to live in the field, in the tents. Another 3 months we pulled guard duty. We pulled guard duty at the Spandau prison. We guarded Hess, Rudolf Hess, who's dead now. We guarded him at Spandau prison. We also pulled guard at the Brandenburg Gate with the Russians. They were on one side of the Brandenburg Gate, which was the East Berlin, and we were on the other side, which is West Berlin. We pulled guard at the Allied Control Authority, ACA. Also the Kommandantur building, which was another building that we had various branches of the different countries, the services. This month it might be the U.S. The U.S. providing food for the people that worked in the Kommandantur building. Next month it would be the French that provided the food, and then the following month it would be the English, and so on and so forth. And this went on for another 3 months, and that's how my duty in Berlin worked out.